what is striking to me is how much Trump is either in denial or there is some personal interest of these underlining strategic objectives that Putin operates on. And Trump makes everything personal, as if his personal relations with Putin can change that calculus that we have described before. This is where the difficulty is. And this is where Trump is incapable of exactly achieving to what I think he genuinely wishes, the stop of the bloodbath.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, today is the day after this phone call that went on for over 2 hours between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and we're still getting the readout from Putin and Trump and their interpretation of what it means, as well as everyone else looking at it. But today we're going to look at it, and we're very privileged to be talking to Orysia Lutsevych. Now, Orysia Lutsevych OBE is the Deputy Director of Russia and Eurasia, the Eurasia Programme and the head of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. Welcome to Times Radio Frontline.
Good to be with Times Radio and you, Philip.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Now, as I was saying, yesterday evening we had Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in their 2-hour phone call, which was the first sit down between. That was after the first sit down between Russian negotiators and Ukrainian negotiators in Turkey last Friday, the day after Vladimir Putin didn't turn up for what he had called himself, but President Zelensky did. Talks are supposed to start again immediately, but there's no real detail about the starting point or anything else seems to have come out. We'll get on to the detail about the talks in a moment, but one of the reactions that seems to have happened today is that the UK and the EU have announced 100 extra sanctions against Russia, targeting Russian weapons supply chains, and I presume that's going to be other countries that are involved in it, targeting Kremlin-funded information operations, financial institutions, and I think most importantly, the shadow fleet of tankers that are around. And that's after Russia fired missiles on 273 drones into Ukraine on Saturday. This is the EU's 17th package of sanctions, but do you think they're going to have an impact? Have sanctions so far had a major impact on Russia and on Putin's thinking?
I think sanctions did have an economic impact. They've, in simple terms, raised prices for everything for Russia that it needs to purchase externally for its production of armed forces. Of course, they find ways to surpass sanctions and find these loopholes. That is why prices are going up. And that is why we find a lot of Western technology from Texas Instruments and others in Russian missiles and drones. For the same matter, they buy it in China, like Ukrainians. So the sanctions made the war more costly for Russia. Sanctions also made it more difficult for Russian companies refinance its debts. It also pushed Russia into more dependence on other currencies, such as, Chinese currency, rupee in India, where they're selling, because they cannot actually operate foreign exchange accounts. And I think it pressures Putin to make some tough choices with regards to inflation, especially. Prices are going. And there was always a deal between Putin and his people that he can be an autocrat and do what he wants, but people's prosperity will improve. That's why they supported Putin for so long at the expense of their personal freedoms. So they've narrowed the corridor for maneuver for Putin, make it more uphill a struggle for him to finance his war, but it has not had a major impact on really either a blank embargo on Russian oil and gas that would actually, or create an escrow account where proceeds from oil and gas would go into an intermediary account. There are other ways to do it. I would say sanctions could have been stronger, and they weren't.
Now, Vladimir Putin is at the center of all of this, and it seems to be every time there's pressure put on him, it's taken off by Donald Trump. Putin seems to be dictating the pace of where things are going. But what is he trying to achieve geopolitically, do you think? And is he actually interested in peace?
It's interesting. I think Putin, since 2007, I would argue, has decided that Russia needs to get off its knees, as it was in his perception after the Cold War. And it was building gradually this militaristic muscle to be able to project hard power. So it started small wars like Georgia, for example, and then expanded because not only Russia wanted to get off its knees, but it wanted to put West on its knees. That was another level of ambition from 2014 when Putin poked and saw all these underbellies, softness, vulnerabilities, fear of Russia to stand up in defense of major breach of the international law, such as the annexation of Crimea. So what happens now is that Putin fundamentally wants U.S. presence out of Europe. Putin wants to be at the grand table with China and United States, divvying up the world into the spheres of control, and obviously Europe. He, as the way he sees it, is part of Russia's um, theater of whatever play control, depending what they're capable of doing. Ukraine stands on the way. Ukraine stands on the way of this expansion of Russia. It has always been a very powerful component of Russian empire from from its inception, and the fact that Ukraine doesn't want to join that geopolitical agenda, as I described, and be part of that expansion, causes Putin problems. That's why what he needs in the short term is to break the spine of Ukrainian resistance, is to partition Ukraine, is to put a friendly government in Kiev that would open up the gate to the rest of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Putin is embarrassed that he lost his strategic objective whenever he didn't capture Kyiv within its first 5 days and has been forced to go for a secondary objective of trying to just secure the Donbass?
Yes, it was a shock for Putin that Ukraine resisted. I think all his intelligence sources were pointing to another scenario where Ukrainians would either run away, Zelensky would be in exile, and those who will remain will greet Russian tanks with flowers. None of that happened. But I don't think Putin has changed his strategic objective. He has adapted his war. What he, I think, honestly saw and conceptualized as a limited military operation. In 3 years, he is putting Russia on the war footing. He is not changing his strategic objective. He is actually pressing for more advantage. He already started the summer offensive campaign, and he is determined to take more Ukrainian territory and to agree to kind of break the transatlantic alliance on Ukraine, which again was on his way to achieve his objectives. So to weaken the alliance in support of Ukraine, to make Ukraine a failed state, to make sure Ukraine cannot mobilize economic and human resources for war, and he believes now he can still win.
Yeah, no, I agree with that analysis completely. And it's strange, and that seems to be dictating his start point for the negotiations or his interactions with Donald Trump. Now, you're turning the same question around. What do you think Trump is up to, and do you think Trump actually knows how to deal with Putin? Because Putin is a past master at manipulating people and working international leaders around the way he goes, and everything comes. But Trump's approach, everything seems to come back to trade, and you mentioned trade at the beginning. But I think one of the positives I got out of Trump's statement on Truth Social last night was he talked about trade when this catastrophic bloodbath is over. And if Putin gets his way, it's not going to be over for a long, long time. What are your thoughts on how Trump is coming in, and what do you think is going to happen next?
You're absolutely right that Trump is underestimating who he is dealing with, and he's dealing with the operative in the Kremlin. He's dealing with somebody who is skilled in reflexive control, in designing a special set of traps that would lead to an opponent actually delivering results that Putin wants at expense of American national interest, and they believe that it's possible. And the Soviet and Russian tradition of that kind of warfare is very strong. So what is striking to me is how much Trump is either in denial, or there is some personal interest of these underlining strategic objectives that Putin operates on. And Trump makes everything personal, as if his personal relations with Putin can change that calculus that we have described before. This is where the difficulty is. And this is where Trump is incapable of exactly achieving to what I think he genuinely wishes, the stop of the bloodbath. It is not by catering to Putin's plan that he will stop the bloodbath. And it's very painful, especially for Ukrainian people, to watch this fundamental misunderstanding of Russia by Donald Trump and a fundamental underestimating of Ukraine. I mean, his recent comment that Russians didn't take Kiev because their tanks were bogged in mud.
In the mud, I know.
I think it's just ridiculous. Okay, that kind of emotions aside, I think Trump indeed wants to stop the war. He wants to show, as he said in his inauguration speech, that he is a peacemaker. All right. So where has he achieved peace so far? Nowhere, neither in the Middle East. We have India-Pakistan new war. We have Ukraine-Russia war continues. And I think there's another motivation that pushes him to this kind of Russian embrace, and that is the economic logic. Trump has been convinced that there are big money to be made. That's why in caps lock we've seen trade. After the phone call with Putin, he thinks that war stands on the way of making big money between Russia and Trump organization, possibly, not necessarily United States. And that is luring. That is luring opportunity. And the last one is, of course, China. Again, it's a Russian smart manipulation that they are saying that decoupling with China would be very useful for United States. It's misconception, mainly because the contribution of Russia to Chinese growth and power is minuscule.
Yeah, it is. But I'm keep asking myself, what is China getting for its support in Russia, and is it getting control of Russian natural resources in the same way that China has taken over natural resources across Africa? As by way of payment for the Chinese investment in critical national infrastructure and roads and telecommunications and all the rest of it, as it expands its Belt and Road Initiative. What price is Russia going to have to pay for Chinese tacit support and physical support at some stage in the future? And will Russia be able to pay that bill?
Well, I'm sure Putin was quite disappointed after the May 9th meeting with Xi, because there were no big deals. The Chinese are reluctant to invest big time in Russia. And it's interesting why. Either they think the market is overpriced, or it's too risky in terms of what is the stability of Putin's own regime, or they decide that they can get what they need without major investment. There's no major investment of China in Russia. And what China is getting mainly is Russia is an instrument of weakening United States and Europe. Russia's invasion of Ukraine created contingency that neither United States nor Europe wanted to deal with. It focuses at least the attention of Europe now on how to contain Russian invasion. And that also that fundamentally opens China more open field in Asia Pacific, and also China is learning a lot about the future of war. Russians are providing Chinese a lot of intelligence on how Western weapons are performing. They're also testing a lot of drones that can later be used in other wars. So they get very valuable insights into new technological warfare.
Oh, there's no doubt that every side is, and every country around the world is using one side or the other to beta test a lot of its new military technology and bits and pieces. But exploring that Chinese-Russian relationship, do you think there's a danger that if Putin gets defeated, there's a danger that the Russian Federation could collapse and China would see that as an opportunity to get some historical territories back, or other interests to try and provide stability? Or am I speculating too far here?
It's a bold question, which I wish more people asked themselves. It's something that we should be thinking as a possible scenario. What is the impact of this war, this invasion on Russia itself? And I think that one way to put at it is that it's really losing a lot of people in the war. Its economic model is constrained, and right now it only basically is fueled by defense and military production. So influx of money to pay people, work 3-4 shifts at defense companies, and then all these compensations to dead and wounded soldiers in Ukraine. I think that China historically has a land dispute with Russia, with back Russian Empire. Chinese are eager to get access to water resources of Altai part, and I think Russians, in a way, have a theory. In order to hold their empire together internally, they want to export entropy, which is chaos, abroad. And this is what they did with this war. Unfortunately, they didn't expect that these sanctions we talked about and Ukrainian resistance will bring back that entropy into Russia itself. And there are a lot of subterranean, signs that as resource pie shrinks, elites at the national level and subnational level, these republics, they're thinking hard how to preserve themselves. So this war is putting pressure. How this will play out is too early to say, and it will depend on the outcome of the war. Like you said, it will be one of the major factors about the future of Russia itself.
Do you think the Trump team might be realizing that, and what they're trying to do is balance off finding a solution without causing the collapse of the Russian Federation? Because actually, if the Russian Federation collapsed, that would make the breakup of Yugoslavia seem like a Sunday school party or something compared with the impact that it would have on the global stage. It might actually trigger us into a global conflict, especially if you get republics that have suddenly got control of old Russian nuclear weapons and nuclear capability.
Well, there is a big spectrum between weakening and collapse. And, when we are talking about collapse, there has to be a lot of factors in place for this to lead to this scenario. At this point, we are nowhere near there. And if this is the logic that is driven, then it's actually a Russian information operation to scare both Western Europe and United States into even thinking about defeating Russia. We often hear that somebody even worse than Putin could come, that you'd rather deal with this type of, KGB kleptocracy type of regime than with right-wing nationalist militants. So yes, they are abusing this narrative, accusing the West for their home audience that they want to actually partition Russia, or they want Russia to collapse in order to rally people around the flag. But again, we on the spectrum of achieving this probably still in the beginning journey of it.
So do you see any similarities between Putin's tactics? You've described it quite well. He's a former intelligence officer. He thinks and operates like a former Soviet intelligence officer. He manipulates other global leaders in the same way that a former Soviet intelligence officer would do. But are you seeing any similarities between his tactics in Ukraine and what he's done elsewhere with different Russian incursions, conflicts, attempts to take over countries and regions in the past? And are there any real lessons that we can pull out of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are certain patterns, and we've looked last year at Moldova, for example. I've did the research on trying to understand how countries can withstand foreign interference, which we call resilience barometer. And it was interesting that the kind of based on expert polling, most people when they looked at Moldova, that was so much under Russian pressure, saw that Moldova is getting more resilient. And why? It's because they understand now the pattern of behavior, looking at Ukraine, looking at what they did in Belarus, looking what they did in Georgia most recently. And in a simple terms, it's easy. They basically try to co-opt elites, either through big payments, or some of them are ideologically aligned. They try to hijack all the reform agenda, especially related to European Union integration. They finance right-wing, anti-European, anti-reform movements. They pour in cash into elections, into those groups, and they do everything in the information space to tear societies apart. We as societies, and it's applicable to the UK, it's applicable to France. We can only exist in democracies if we can reach some common ground between each other. And this is what Russia does. It attacks the capacity to reach the common ground through social media, through special narratives that they put people head to head, and they make governance impossible, so we cannot deploy resources that we do have to defend ourselves.
Yes, master manipulation. But critical to any peace deal then is trying to get something that's going to be acceptable to the Ukrainian people. Zelensky's formally recognized that he can't get the captured territory back militarily, and Putin keeps demanding more territory than the Russians currently occupy. What do you think the Ukrainian people will accept? And are there any red lines that you think the Ukrainian people will make sure that President Zelensky can't cross?
For Ukraine, it's important to understand the context of this war. It's a total war against civilian population. I think on average, Russians have launched 22 ballistic missiles a day throughout this war, on average. So when you just think about it, Russians have killed more than, killed and injured more than 40,000 civilians. And they've destroyed Ukrainian energy generation capacity in wintertime. Ukrainians interpret this as a genocidal war. It's an existential enemy that doesn't just want a piece of territory. It wants whole of Ukraine. So what is the compromise for Ukraine? The compromise is actually to sit at the table and even to discuss a ceasefire, knowing that there were 200 rounds of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia that were breached and led to nothing. There's zero trust in those people. So the compromise is, I guess right now, given how difficult it is for Ukraine to mobilize force, to agree that Ukraine will not retake its occupied territories by force. That's a compromise. The compromise is actually to discuss how Russian reparations will go to Ukrainian civilians, because it could be done by force without compromise, for example, by seizing Russian sovereign assets. So the compromise is to discuss with Russia how they plan to compensate. These are the types of, and I guess the compromise that right now seem to be acceptable is some kind of security arrangement that is outside of NATO. Because let's remember that Ukrainian constitution, and there is an overwhelming majority in Ukraine for NATO membership. So compromise is to start thinking about some other arrangement of security and not insisting on NATO. So these, I think, are the compromises Ukrainians are willing to put on the table.
Okay, interesting. One of the other things that Vladimir Putin keeps asking for, apart from more territory and more of everything, and Ukraine not to rearm and the West to stop supporting it, is for any ceasefire to be linked to elections. And President Zelensky, effectively trying to get him out of power. Is Putin that scared of Zelensky? And who do you think would stand against him? And would the Russians? And I think I know the answer to this question. Would the Russians use every opportunity they've got to try and interfere with the elections? And have they done that elsewhere across Europe and across the globe? Do you think?
Yes, I think it's personal between Zelensky and Putin. Putin hates Zelensky because he is the one who actually united Europe against Russia. He managed through his rhetoric, through Ukraine's courage, through, I think quite skillful diplomacy to unite Europe against Russia. I mean, right now, United States is out of the picture, but even previously, it was a real transatlantic unity on Russia. I think here's one thing that Ukrainians will not compromise, and that is sovereignty. In the meaning of, it is not up to Russia to decide whether Ukraine is neutral. It's not up to Russia to decide when Ukraine holds elections. And it's not up to Russia to say about the size of the military. These are all sovereign decisions of Ukraine. And this is where Trump is so dangerous because he doesn't understand it. He cannot trade Ukrainian sovereignty with Putin. So, for why Putin wants elections, one reason is because he hates Zelensky. Another one, he will fight war in another way. He wants elections to cause, again, frictions in Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine is very, I would say, is very united on the how the war should end. Still, there's not divergence in the society about what should be the outcome of the war. And if there is a ceasefire and without little preparation for the to stabilize situation, because let's remember, you need stabilization measures. It's not like you have a war with a front line of more than 1,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers, and you can have elections next month. It's impossible. And this is why Putin wants to push Ukraine into the abyss of chaos.
Yeah, no, it's interesting watching the manipulation that's going on. But Russia economically is in a difficult position. It clearly can't. Its defense industrial base is in real difficulties because it's relying on North Korea and China and Iran and elsewhere. But Ukraine, traditionally was the seat of Soviet military technology, with its missile technology, with a lot of tanks being designed and built in Ukraine, with a lot of military aircraft being designed and built in Ukraine in old Soviet era. So those skills still exist, and we're seeing that in the evolution of the Ukrainian defense industrial base. Do you think Ukraine is going to be, and this is something that Europe will look to, a future European defense manufacturing powerhouse?
Oh, I think Ukraine right now, there's no doubt, has the largest and most capable army in Europe. It's the army that is modernizing in wartime, that has created, for example, the new type of force, which is a drone force that didn't exist before. And right now, Ukraine produces 40% of all military kit it uses on the battlefield. It's not bad. What is interesting fact is that last year Ukraine produced more howitzers than France, and France is not at war. Ukraine is a country of immense innovation, which can only happen in free society. And this is why I think we should always remember that Russia is an autocracy and it cannot win the innovation race. I do not believe it. There is all studies about how unfree societies cannot innovate and change. So yes, I think we have this interesting rearm Europe, which is the new policy of Europe to build its strategic autonomy and to be able to defend against enemies. Ukraine should be an integral part of that program for production, for innovation, for force generation.
Orysia, fantastic. I think on the positive note that Ukraine is the center of innovation and Russia can never keep up is a good point for us to end our discussion here. Orysia, many thanks for chatting to me today on Frontline.
Thank you, Philip. Good to be with you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like to be amongst the first to get exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership at the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs or read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.